Hey, I'm Naveed Jamali, host of Newsweek's Unconventional. And boy, did you all have a lot of questions about the B-2 stealth bomber episode. So let's get right into them. So our first question, and I got this question a lot, is from Pirates of the Bohemians 9600. And he asks, so effing jealous, who do you know to make this happen? It's a question I got a lot. I think it's important to take us just a very quick step back and tell you who I am. So I'm a journalist at Newsweek, and I'm not an influencer, I'm not a YouTuber. This really is a journalistic pursuit, and I think that's sort of what separates this completely from other things you may see on YouTube. So the process for us is that we have to work with the Air Force to report on this. And there's a whole paperwork process, approval process, but I'm doing this in my capacity as a journalist for Newsweek, not as an independent YouTuber or as a social media influencer. So how we got this is a funny story. We were showing the B-52 video, link below if you haven't seen it yet. We were showing it to the general in charge of Global Strike Command at the Air Force. We showed it to him. He loved it so much that he called us the following week, or his people called us and said, you did a great job with the B-52. We want you to do the same thing with the B-2 stealth bomber. And oh, by the way, you have a few days to decide to make this happen. So that's how we got it. All right, so this is a question that I actually got a lot of times. And it's essentially asking me if there's a bathroom or a toilet on the bomber, and also asking about a microwave. So the short answer in terms of a bathroom, no, there is no bathroom. There are, however, mechanisms that one can use to relieve yourself, including sort of a chemical toilet, which is essentially exactly what it sounds like. Additionally, there are pieces of equipment pilots can wear that they can use everywhere from essentially what's like a diaper to other mechanisms to relieve themselves. If you want to learn more about that, we talk about that in detail in the B-52 episode, link it right here. And insofar as a microwave, yes, there is a microwave. Here's a question, comment below if you know this. What is in the B-52? There's no microwave, but they have another way to make food. But you're right, there are a lot of eating for 20 plus hours in both the B-52 and the B-2. It's really important. So there are ways for pilots to bring food, they bring coolers, heat them up, store them, and it's definitely, if you eat and you drink, well, there's gotta be a way to relieve yourself. So it is actually an important part of both jets, and it's a good question. I can tell you in both the B-2 and the B-52, I did not avail of myself of either of those accommodations. A lot of you also wanted to know how many crew does the B-2 have? Additionally, some of you point out and asked, was it safe for me to only fly with one pilot? That some of you noticed there was space behind me, and is there a place for a third person? And also, of course, flying in both the B-2 and the B-52, which was 7 hours, do have a better appreciation for crew longevity for these long missions. So for the B-2, there are only 2 crew members. There's a pilot and a mission commander. And in my case, there was no third person. It was just me and Bandit. That's the call sign for the pilot who was flying me. And totally safe. We briefed, and there were certain things I had to do, primarily arming and de-arming and safing the ejection seat. He sat on the left side only because the controls they're exactly the same on my side as they're on his side, with one exception. And I will actually ask you, if you know, comment below what that only difference. It's a pretty big one. So he sat on the left side because that control is only on the left side. And it is you're completely capable of flying with one pilot. We weren't flying like, a combat mission. So, but no, there is only 2 crew members on every flight. And I can tell you that sitting in that ejection seat is far from comfortable. I can see why, and when I got up and stretched, that was legit. Like, it was not comfortable. So the sense that I got is that it is completely safe to fly with one pilot, and to have another pilot put out an air mattress and put out a sleeping bag and just sack out while the other pilot flies. Some of these pilots are flying a full day before they actually get into combat, and then a full day back, if you can imagine that. So eating, sleeping, peeing, and other things are a fact of life for that aircraft. You have to be able to sleep, and I can't imagine how exhausting it must be. The B-2, man, that was like a physical challenge to be able to do that. The B-2, so much smoother, so much more comfortable, air conditioning that worked, that like the temperature was right. It's loud, it was kind of smelly, but yeah, I think those pilots are pretty badass to be able to fly that long. It is a real, it's like being a marathoner, so a lot of respect to all of them. How on earth does one go about getting permission to fly in a B-2 for a YouTube video? You honestly called a massive favor from someone very high up, and I couldn't help but notice the former spy and let my imagination run wild. All right, so let's just address this, because I think it's definitely something that we talk about. For those of you who don't know, I spent 3 years working undercover for the FBI against Russian intelligence, the GRU. I wrote a book about it called How to Catch a Russian Spy. When I wrote the book, I was in the Navy. I was also an intelligence officer. So everything I talk about was reviewed for national security concerns by the Department of Defense. If you look in the book, I think in the first couple pages it talks about that. So I would say that I'm a bit of a trusted quant when it comes to some of the security stuff. I've handled classified information. I've worked firsthand in creating some of that significantly sensitive classified information. When I was talking to the Russians, that's stuff that was classified. So yeah, I've been around some pretty crazy stuff, and the B-2 is no exception. I mean, it certainly was crazy, but I do think that being a journalist, but also having that background, makes it a little more easy for me to understand how to navigate in that world. And obviously, you're right to ask. The Air Force, as you heard in the video, reviewed the footage, and we left with about 30% of the footage we used. So they knew that I wasn't going to F them over from national security. Now, I want to make this clear. National security review is not the same as editorial review. So I'm a journalist. That means that if people say things, it's fair game. It also means that if we video or capture images that could potentially show the aircraft that's, something that's secret. In the B-52, for example, there was a classified compartment behind us. We agreed not to film it. There was one point for like a second that compartment was visible. When the Air Force reviewed it, we had to like blur it out or cut it out completely. That's totally fine. So that's my background. So let me get this right. The Air Force authorized a B-2 flight without a second qualified pilot on board. Yeah, but they authorized it with a unqualified non-pilot, so I think it all kind of works out. New to this channel, how in the hell did you get the clearance to actually get inside of one of America's most guarded secrets? Who said I got the clearance? All right. A lot of you noticed a little bit of an Easter egg in the B-2 video, and that is the air fresheners. So when we got into the jet, and it's a big deal, right? So as far as I know, no one has filmed and recorded audio inside a B-2. So before we came in to set the cameras up, they sanitized the jet. Not just from a classification standpoint, but sometimes people put funny things, patches, and maybe sayings that could be a little questionable. So they cleaned out the jet. And it was just, we got in there, there was nothing in there, with one exception. And that one exception was the black ice air fresheners. And I think that's just a really funny thing that they use black ice. So they do so, as Bandit explained to me later, is because the jet, after 20 plus hours, can really stink. And I mean, one of the things I noticed about flying in it is, with the dry air, is how dehydrated I got. So I'm sure that you're sweating, you're drinking, I'm sure there's no real circulation. Those black ice air fresheners are probably one of the few things that kind of eat up the smell. And despite taking anything else out, they left them in there. And I think a lot of you noticed that, and it is pretty funny, but yes, they serve a strategic and tactical purpose. If you're gonna fly to wherever for 40 hours, you at least wanna smell nice when you get there. So what was it like to fly in a B-2. Was it a bumpy ride or was it smooth? How was the visibility? It didn't look great. You know, I was so like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this the entire time, that it's hard for me to recount it. But it was very, very smooth. The jet handled surprisingly well compared to a B-52. When I was flying in the B-52, I'd watch the pilots turn the yoke, and you could see they had to really muscle it. And they turn it, and then like literally like 5 minutes later, the jet would turn. The B-2 was not that. You know, you could see as Bandit was flying around, the jet was responsive. We didn't hit any turbulence. It was a beautiful flying day. It was just butter smooth. He was a smooth pilot. The visibility was really good, actually, although it's not a bubble canopy like in a fighter jet. You know, I could look over to my right. I had good visibility. I could spot the other B-2 and T-38 flying in trail. Obviously, you can't see behind the jet. You can see probably about 45 degrees out. One of the things that was interesting, and the windows have sort of this chicken wire material. I can't say what it's for, but that when you're looking out the windows, if you're just kind of focusing out, your vision tends to focus on, think of it like a screen door almost, but bigger. Tends to focus on those little mesh, and you sometimes lose spatial awareness. So beyond that, visibility was good, weather was beautiful. The actual visibility when we were flying was like unlimited. So really smooth takeoff and landing. The thing that I don't know that came through necessarily is actually how high up you sit in the B-2. The B-2 sits up when you're got the landing gear on the ground, you're actually pretty high up. And interestingly enough, the cockpit in the B-2 versus the B-52, so much more roomier. It's like 1,000 times more pleasant. B-52 is a tough jet to be in. I have a lot of respect for those crew. As always, really appreciate you watching the video. Please make sure you like and subscribe. I know from our stats, 98% of you that watch the B-2 video aren't subscribed. So please make sure that you are subscribed. And look, you know, we want to hear from you. Let us know if there's things you want us to follow. Make sure you follow us on Instagram. And yeah, just keep the questions coming.